Hello! In this video, we would like to describe how to write properly the research question and how to formulate the hypothesis of our study. So first of all, we will talk about how to identify which are the research questions that are relevant for our study, and also we will talk about how to formulate the hypothesis. It's very important to identify research question because writing good questions will help us to achieve the success for the data analysis project. If we have the idea of what we want to achieve, what question do we want to answer, then it will be easier for us to determine whether we succeeded in this idea. So we have to be aware to translate the research questions into another question or another formulation that can be solved using data analysis. One typical research question properly formulated will lead us to explore the relationships between the variable under our study. And also it will help us to create the storyboard. When we select the results and when we select the tables and graphs that we will be shown in our report, in our paper, then we will have to take into account the research questions we define at the very beginning of the project, and then we will go back to these questions and we will try to answer and provide the evidences to why and how are we answering to these questions. If we want to write good research questions, we have to select actual and relevant questions. That means reviewing the state of the art, what have published previous authors and what has been published in existing literature, and be aware that we are solving a gap that no one has previously addressed. So it should be grounded in theory and prior research. We have to take into account this state of the art, and also it shouldn't be neither too simple nor complex or biased. And that means that it should be a research question that's feasible to answer through survey research or maybe data analysis. How to write the research question? There are different types of questions. First of all, we can check whether a particular phenomena exists in a population group, or we could just describe and classify the subjects, maybe the students belonging to a school, or maybe a group of students that have their own particularities. We also may analyze the composition, maybe for instance for measurement scales. We can analyze whether it makes sense to consider that the measurement scale is composed of a series of items, and we can analyze that all the items are contributing similarly to this measurement scale. Also, we can analyze the relationship between different variables, or we could analyze, for instance, characteristics to a student's profile and also variables about the performance in school. Let's say the grade performance average, or dropout, or other indicators of success in education. We can also compare different groups of students or different types of schools or different variables contained to the same dataset. And finally, we will be also interested in a causality relation. That means that a series of predictors have a potentially influence on the outcome variable. So for instance, we could analyze which are the predictors of academic success. When developing the research question, it's not an easy task because it should be done at the beginning of the research when we don't have an idea of the outcomes that we will obtain. So we have to begin with the definition of the subject of interest, and then we have to research and review the state of the art. This research should be done through in a very careful way in order to guarantee that we reviewed all available and all previous existing papers and reports about the topic we want to study. So once we have defined the scope and we have defined which is going to be the gap research that we are going to address, then we can write and revise the research question until we are able to write properly our research question. Once we have defined the research question, we are ready to write the hypothesis of the project. The hypothesis should be related with the research questions, and also they should be testable and measurable. The hypothesis state an expected result according to the state of the art of the literature, but also the hypothesis should be written in a way that it's easy to identify the variables or the indicators that will help us to test or reject the hypothesis. Hypothesis, of course, should be based on a logical basis, and it should point out to the most likely outcome. Usually when writing a hypothesis, it's based on the idea that until we don't found any evidence, then what has been previously suggested by literature and also the state of the art, it's the most likely response that we will find in our dataset. Some considerations when writing a research question and hypothesis. We have to think about the questions we need to answer, not only the questions that we are able to answer, but also which questions are more interesting for our research. And we should avoid to select previously which type of model or which tools do we want to answer. We have to select the tools and the models according to the research questions that we need to answer and we have previously selected. Also, the review of the state of the art is essential for writing good research questions, and we have to think about whether there are other research questions that could be still unanswered by previous research and could fit our data and could match better with our interests in our research. And finally, it's very important that we apply the scientific thinking. That means that we firstly define the research questions and then we develop the data collection and the data analysis. It is not a good idea to try to change our research question after obtaining results or after collecting the data. So, if possible, we have to keep this approach of the scientific thinking and develop each step when it is expected. With this, I finish my presentation about defining the research question. Thank you for your attention. I hope to see you in the next video.